In this video, I'm going to talk about the two things that our brain needs in practice so that we're able to perform effectively. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at QuickStartClarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. So I've made a lot of videos about how to practice effectively and how to structure your practice, and I really like to nerd out on being more efficient and effective in the practice room, because the more efficient I can be in the practice room, then the less time I have to practice, and I'm all for that. It dawned on me though, as I was teaching recently, that all of that stuff, all of the 4 opportunities for improvement, the 3 C's, the 3 I's, the success formula, the practice plan, all of those things really kind of have 2 big things as the end goal for our brain. So I wanted to elaborate on that a little bit and give you guys an idea of what 2 things you need to be doing in your practice so that your brain really learns the information and is able to perform confidently. And these 2 things are kind of the umbrella categories that make the difference in your playing and in your learning process. So what those 2 things are encoding and recall. And those are kind of fancy neuroscience terms. They're often talked about when it comes to memories and actually remembering things. And if you think about it, practicing is remembering how to play the piece, right? And I'm not talking about memorizing your music and actually playing from memory, though this is certainly very important if you are actually playing from memory as well. But really what this has to do with is any performance. I've always found in performance that, especially when it's something that I'm well prepared for and really know, I'm pretty much playing from memory, just with the music there to give a little visual cues to keep track of where I am and help me to know what's coming up next. So it makes perfect sense that these 2 terms of encoding and recall that are so important to memory are also so important to the music learning process. So let me talk about what they actually are. When it comes to memory, encoding is actually getting the information in. So when you have the classic example of 2 spouses and one of them says something to the other one, and then a week later or a day later or 10 minutes later, they're like, "Oh, hey honey, you remember when I said that?" And they're like, "Nope. Nope, you didn't. You definitely didn't say that." That's an encoding problem, because the information just didn't actually make it in. It's sort of in one ear, out one other kind of thing. So the thing that we need to do is actually encode the information in and make sure that it sticks, so it's not going in one ear and out the other. So when it comes to recall, that's actually bringing the memory out. So if you're met somebody and you learned their name and later you're like, "Oh, what was their name? Like, I know I knew it, but what was it again?" That's trying to recall. There also could be an encoding problem there. So often when we're meeting people, their names go in one ear, out the other. So it could be an encoding problem too. But if it's somebody who, like, you knew their name and then you're trying to recall it and can't remember, that's an example of recall. This happens also maybe with like actors in a show. You're like, "Oh, they look so familiar, but I can't quite remember their name." Or when you're taking a test and it's like, "Oh, I know that I studied this. I can like visualize when I was learning it and where it was in the textbook, but I just can't pull out the exact word or term that you need in the moment." That's a recall problem. Now, how this applies to playing music is when we're learning music and when we're practicing, most of the time we're kind of in a gray area. We're not being super clear with ourselves of, are we encoding new information or are we recalling old information? And oftentimes we'll get those mixed up, where we're trying to play like we're recalling the information because that's how it feels when we perform, and we're trying to practice like how it's going to feel when we perform. So we're trying to recall it, but we never actually encoded it in the first place. So then we just end up making mistakes. And unknowingly, actually, we're encoding the mistakes when we just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. So when it comes to learning music, I think it's really important to be clear to yourself. Are you working on encoding new information right now, or are you working on recalling information that's already encoded? I sometimes will call this practice mode versus performance mode. It's kind of the same idea, maybe slightly different. But in practice mode, you're in that sort of encoding mode where if something doesn't go right, if you make a mistake, you stop and fix it right away to make sure that the right information gets encoded. When you're in performance mode, you're in recall mode, where you're trying to recall that information that you learned and trying to put it into practice and actually have it go smoothly in a continuous, uninterrupted performance of it. So those are kind of the two different camps to be in. Encoding, practice mode, performance, recall mode. Those two different modes are what we need to be more deliberate about with what we're doing in our practice. Now let's talk about what those can actually look like a little more in depth. So encoding is when we're learning new information. That's when you're learning the notes, figuring out how the rhythms go, thinking about what the dynamics are. I love audiation for the encoding stage, because in audiation you don't have to deal with the baggage of the instrument. You're just sort of visualizing or audiating how the music goes and hearing it in your head and getting that learned and imprinting that onto your memory. Other examples of encoding are most of the practice techniques. So when you're doing practice rhythms, where you're changing up the rhythm, that's sort of looking at it from a different lens. When you're going slower or going at different tempos, that gives you another lens to look at. When you're doing smaller chunks, when you're isolating things, doing different groupings, all of that kind of stuff is to make your brain really think about it and really wrestle with it. When your brain has to think about what it's doing, that means that you're encoding. You're really getting in there, getting into the details, getting into the dirt and being like, okay, how does this go? What am I doing to make this happen? Really being deliberate about every note you play, how you're playing it, and having to actually think about it. If you find yourself sort of just going through the motions and just kind of feeling it, then that means you're more in recall mode, which is fine and can be good, and it's good to practice recall mode. The danger is when you're trying to learn something new, you're sort of feeling your way through it like as if it's a performance and you're kind of in recall mode, but you haven't actually thoroughly encoded the information to be recalled correctly, and you're ending up playing mistakes, and through repetition, you're actually encoding those mistakes. So that's encoding, is looking at it in different ways, really having to think about what you're doing and being really intentional and really deliberate about what you're actually playing and playing it really accurately and correctly. Recall, or performance mode, is where you've already encoded the information, now you're putting it together and pulling it out of your brain so that you can do it smoothly and fluidly. So the best way to do this, and the best example of recall, is actual performances, where you just are playing through the whole thing in front of an audience. There's a little bit of a high pressure recall there because you're doing it in front of people and trying to do well, and you only have one shot to do it well. So it's a good idea that you practice recalling before the actual performance. And the best way to do that is pick just a phrase or a section of the piece, or even the whole piece, and say, I'm going to play through this. No matter what happens, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to be in that state of recalling the information. Recall usually works better when you're not trying so hard. So encoding is great to like really wrestle with it, really be thinking hard about it. When you're recalling, you just kind of want to hear how the music goes in your head and just sort of be playing along with how it goes and just feeling really relaxed and really in the moment, sort of tracking along with the beat. So hopefully this has given you some food for thought. Hopefully you can take this away and ask yourself in your practice, am I encoding right now or am I recalling? And be really careful that when you should be encoding, you're not recalling. And actually vice versa. When you're in a performance, make sure that you aren't being overly critical in practice mode and thinking, oh, is that exactly right? Is that exactly how I want it to go? It's too late to figure out exactly how you want it to go. You just have to get in the zone and pull out whatever you have practiced in there. So Give this a try. Let me know if you learned anything new in the comments and how this goes for you. I think that this is hopefully a little bit of a different way to think about it. When I was teaching this and it sort of popped in my head, it was really kind of interesting and a different way of looking at it, and I'm looking forward to applying it to my practice as well. But I hope you have a great time encoding and recalling all of the music that you want to learn. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the QuickStart Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.